Our theme this year is All Together Now. It has been, as you all know, a particularly challenging time for the arts around the world, and we're not immune to that. We would really appreciate your support, and you can rest assured every cent, penny, farthing, dollar of it will go directly into these programs that you love and enjoy. Like our annual festival, yes, but also our year-round events for writers and readers of all ages at the Writers' Center. Now is a time when, more than ever, we need your support. So you will see, as you exit the room at the end of the session, through the only available exit, I might add, a lovely donation box. Please be kind to it. This session is between Raymond Antrobus, author of The Quiet Air, an investigation of missing sound, and Andre Bagoo, who is himself a poet, essayist, former reporter, and the winner of the 2021 OCM Bocas Prize for Nonfiction. Andre will, of course, tell you more about The Quiet Air, but I will tell you that it is one of the most extraordinary books in any genre that I have read, and I will be thinking about it for a long time. Please enjoy this session.
Thank you, Shivani. Hello, everyone. I sometimes feel when I'm on a stage like this, like Graham Norton, and I'm about to interview like a star. I'll just begin by introducing Raymond. Embodying the highest traditions of the confessional poets, all of Raymond Antrobus's spectacular books draw upon the self as a part of an examination of the wider world. What unites his poetry collections, including The Perseverance, All the Names Given, and Signs Music, the latter two of which were shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize, and his newest book, 2025's memoir, The Quiet Air, an investigation of missing sound, is precisely the same powerful current that made the confessional poets unforgettable, the autobiographical. There is no dichotomy within Antrobus's body of work. There is no gap between his poetry and his prose. All are part of an organic, ever-expanding whole in which the seeds of the earlier work sprout so spectacularly in the later work. This memoir enriches the poetry, and the poetry enriches the memoir, which is itself a short story collection, an essay collection, and an anti-polemic that still is kind of a polemic, all of which paints with vivid brushstrokes a portrait of a world alight with injustice. Written with a flair for narrative and for the elegant exposition of complex and raw realities, The Quiet Air charts one person's journey to self-acceptance, but its many lessons are larger than one person. This is a book about deaf gain, deaf shame, and deaf anger. It is also a book about race, complexion, nationality. Antrobus is of Caribbean heritage, masculinity, class, communication and miscommunication, politics, education, fate, and destiny. And it is a book about fathers, mothers, teachers, and sons. Described by the New York Times as an insightful, big-hearted memoir that skillfully interrogates his own experience, and by the OCM Bocas Prize-winning poet and writer Sophia Sinclair as an essential education, this memoir has deservedly brought Antrobus to an even wider audience. Months after the book's publication last year, he was selected as a judge of the Booker Prize, and only last month he was announced as a Guggenheim Fellow. He was previously awarded the Poetry Review's Jeffrey Dermer Prize, judged by none other than novelist and poet Ocean Vuong. the Ted Hughes Award, the Rathbone Folio Prize, and the Somerset Maugham Award. It is a real honor to welcome back to the Boca stage Raymond Antrobus. And perhaps we could begin with a reading. Sure. Yeah.
Greetings, good afternoon, hello, how do you do? I'm going to read from the Quiet Ear. What's happened so far is I'm back in Jamaica, and this is my first time being in Jamaica, meeting deaf people and deaf community and learning about the specific deaf culture within the island, within Jamaica. It's different in different parts of the islands. I've been learning a lot about Trinidadian Sign Language and Trinidadian deaf culture over the last few days, and I can't wait to talk about that and share that with people that are living that experience as well. So this is me going back to Jamaica. On my second day in Kingston, I was interviewed on Smile Jamaica, a historic live morning TV show that lit up a small rectangular screen in my grandparents' living room in Patty Hill. I was introduced to Antoinette Aiken, Jamaica's most prominent sign language interpreter. She stood interpreting in Jamaican sign beside the couch. The host had introduced me as a so-called British Jamaican, then asked his first question, "Are you Jamaican?" Yes, my father was born in Jamaica, and I've been coming back since childhood. The host sneered, leaning back, eyebrows raised. "You're not Jamaican." I felt the instant sting of the host vibrate in my chest. He went on, "So they tell me that you're deaf. But how are you deaf exactly? You don't look deaf. You hear me speaking now?" This was essentially what the BBC host said to me on the radio months earlier. This is why I couldn't relax in Jamaica. This is why I can't relax in England. It's too easy to be spun away from any ground I claim. Everything feels like it has to be earned, fought for, sussed out. I hadn't yet worked out how to not hear my father in every Jamaican man with a tendency to scorn and shame. The fact that the interview was broadcast live to the whole island meant going back to the hotel and not leaving again for the day. What I came to remember is that Jamaica has a different rhythm and pace. It isn't personal. Conversation is often double-edged. To function, I need to tune into it. Western rhythm can't flow. It will keep me socially awkward and oversensitive to people's blunt comments. They need to wash over me. I need to pick them out of my skin and point them back. This particular aspect of Jamaica makes deafness hard to assert. People often expect quick responses. There's little mercy given to accommodate anyone who moves slower. My listening strategy often doesn't work. People refuse to be inconvenienced by repeating themselves. And my light skin and British accent makes some people automatically defensive, ready to fire. I cannot be read without the colonial gaze. Once, as a child walking on a beach without hearing aids, a man with dreads and a string vest ran up to me, Vex. Excuse, I should have said this, a little bit of language here. What the rascal are you at know me for, pussy boy? You hear me now? Me call you from over there. I explained I was deaf. It seemed to make him angrier, you pussy boy. And he walked away, leaving me wondering what he wanted in the first place. Then, a white man with a round stomach and a straw sun hat shouted from his hotel balcony, "What on earth are you doing talking to people like that, you moron?" The dread man looked up. No, sir. That's just how we talk in the island, man. Jamaica speak, man." I walked on as dread man apologized again to the sun hat man on the balcony. The next morning, I was driven to a local mainstream primary school in Kingston with a Jamaican-born novelist who now lives in New York and a young literacy advocate also living in New York. We stood in the assembly courtyard and took questions from students on poetry and living as a writer. One question asked of me by an 11-year-old boy was, "Is it emotional to write a book?" I was moved by many of the thoughtful questions, but that one stayed with me. I wasn't surprised. I'm going to skip over to that. Cool. After the poem, I perform a poem, and then I leave. One of the teachers admitted to her students, no, sorry, I'm going to go screw forward. It'd be too long to explain it. You get it, you get all that. They think I'm white, I'm in Jamaica, whatever. After the assembly... Okay, at the Caribbean Christian Center for the Deaf, I met deaf Jamaicans who have developed a community that is also linked to Deaf Can Coffee, a non-profit organization set up by Alfred Evelyn Clark, a deaf Jamaican farmer who has helped teach young deaf Jamaicans how to roast coffee beans. A number of Deaf Can coffee shops have now been launched around the island. Some deaf students at the school work in the coffee shops as baristas or teach some Jamaican Sign Language. Antoinette Aiken, a coder, a child of deaf adult, gave me an anecdotal statistic that 95% of people born deaf in Jamaica grow up illiterate. In the UK, it's around 70%. Of course, it doesn't mean they grow up without language. Rather, most would be functionally literate, meaning they would be fluent in sign language but struggle to write grammatically correct English. The school was made up of cement buildings with zinc roofs surrounding a wide open cement playground where students were signing. The school's director was a deaf Jamaican called Tashi Widmer. I walked into her office, shook her hand, and she signed her name. I had to quickly excuse myself from the room. Something had erupted that I couldn't take. I trembled, trying not to burst, but it came and I couldn't stop. I hadn't imagined this in Jamaica. I kept hearing my dead father's voice, limited, and I hadn't taken in my own limited imagination for what I could have become had I grown up in Jamaica. That existing on the island as a deaf person and thriving was possible. That connecting with my Jamaican family, blood and chosen, was possible. That having an integrated deaf identity on the island was possible. The heat of that shame flooded me. The director held me. I cried, and she held me through the heat and convulsions while I apologized. I'm sorry. I just didn't know. I didn't know. And what I didn't know was that there was a place for me in Jamaica, that there were softer edges, a Jamaican deaf space where you weren't judged for having different needs or assumed to be slow or uppity or whatever sharp projection came your way. I'd spent years unable to imagine what my acceptance in Jamaica could look like, and in a way I'd found it, or at least part of it. I gathered myself and ran a workshop in the school hall, asking if any of the class could show me a poem in Jamaican Sign Language. A boy signed a deaf fable of a lumberjack who tried to cut down a tree. When he shouted, "Timber!" it wouldn't fall. The tree doctor tested the tree's hearing, said, "The tree is deaf." And he signed the word, "Timber!" and the tree fell.
Wow. I just want to start with that question that was asked of you, because when I read this book, I went through so many emotions. I cried, I laughed, I got angry, I got despairing, then I had hope. It was a real roller coaster. And that question that is asked of you, is it emotional to write a book? What was it like to write this book? I understood it took 6 years to write. Was it an emotional process for you? Was it cathartic? How did it go?
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, I got a mic here. Was it emotional? Was it cathartic? Yes. My comfort language is poetry. I'm a poet through and through. That is my most natural language. And does it work? 1 2 1 2. Wicked. Yeah, man. I'm here. All right. So I was resistant to write this book, and if I'm honest, I was tricked into it. I was tricked.
Did you have a very good editor then?
A tricky editor. Where every time I write a poem, she just said, make it longer. And before you know it, you got wall-to-wall text, and you have something that people will actually read. Apparently, people don't like books with line breaks in them. So you got wall-to-wall text, people read it. I'm being silly. A lot. What I realized with poetry is that I have developed a sensibility in which I hide in poetry because I understand its function. Poetry, or at least in the way I approach my own writing, is that it thrives through symbol. You build symbol, you build gesture, and you work the narrative or the ideas of the poem around the image. And not only around the actual black printed words, but also in the space between the words and between, the white space around the page, that also becomes active. So in poetry, you can see the space between words as a kind of silence, and you can activate that silence. You can give that meaning. I think that is such a big reason for why poetry is my most natural language and landing place for the way that I have always expressed myself from as far as I can remember, because I used to be very intensely private about poetry. How many people here are poets? How many people? All right, okay. So I'm seeing about 4 people raise their hands, but I know that everyone here goes home at some point in their life, even if while they're at school, they've written in the journal and it's been private. So there's lots of private poets in this audience. So shout out all the private poets who didn't raise your hands. I didn't mean to out you, but you're in a safe space. We're in a literature festival. Welcome. I see you. I'm so glad you're here. Private poets. And so you were
But
right.
you say you hide.
Yes.
You say you hide in your poetry, but
Yes.
I find the opposite to be true because I find all of the seeds of the current book were kind of planted before. You've written so movingly, for instance, about your relationship with your father in the earlier books.
So, yes, no, you're right. But even within the poem, my idea of how to serve a poem is often about a single idea, a single moment. When you write longer form and people have this expectation that you're going to write something that has a wider, longer arc, it's a bit different. So there were things where, while writing this book, I would shut it down and be like, here's the image that I want to exit this space from. And then the editor would be like, no, don't shut it down. Keep going, keep saying the thing. And that's how I think poetry has kept me safe, because often when I've got to that moment where I want to come away, I create that within the poetry, within the form, to come away from that moment. But longer form stuff, it's like you've got to keep going, you've got to say more. In short, what then ended up happening was I was spiraling, I was not mentally well, and then my therapist ended up diagnosing me with complex PTSD. And then I had to get medicated, and then I got diagnosed with ADHD, and then what began a whole other kind of therapeutic process, which happened off page. And I had to kind of go through some of that and then come back to it. So this was a painful thing to write, if I'm honest.
So you say
emotional.
therapeutic off-page, but can you view your writing as somehow fitting in within that confrontation of all of these emotions?
Well, because the other thing is like I very much see my work in lineage. So I'm very much in conversation with so many. I think one of my biggest privileges is being able to claim, say, the English poets. I'm a big fan of the Romantics. I love Wordsworth, Coleridge, Keats, and I also love Walcott and Braithwaite. So these kind of canonized figures. And then I also love Terence Hayes and Gwendolyn Brooks. So I've had all of these different canons and all of these different literature wells to draw from and pull from. And I've applied a lot of that to my own work. And that with that mentality, it's made me feel like I'm not alone in this. Because often when people think of like a confessional poet, or they think about a poet being emotional, it could be accused of self-indulgence, right?
Yeah, this term confessional poet, when it emerged in the 1950s, 60s, it was normally snarkily applied by male critics, generally to female poets like Anne Sexton and whatnot. But we've come full circle, where we require that truth.
Okay.
There's no longer a pejorative attached to the domestic. But let's talk a little bit about the title, because for me the richness...
One second, sorry, my son is calling me. Can I pick it up?
Oh, yes, please.
Hey, Ira. Look.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Whoa.
This is the Boca's face.
Daddy is on stage. You on the train? Oh, wow. Okay, it's bedtime. You're going to tell us you need to... Oh, okay. Okay, okay. Baby, Daddy's busy right now. I've got to go. I'm on stage. Yeah, sorry. Bye. Good night. Bye. Bye-bye.
Oh, my. Aww.
Sorry.
Wow. I think this has to lead to the next question, which is, how do you balance your family life with your work life?
I don't, clearly. Clearly.
You're not alone.
I mean, no, I try and integrate it in a way. You know, I've learned so much about, like, you know, my son is 4, and yeah, he's hearing. I've taught him some sign. One of the things that's interesting about his language and his development of language is that he always says to his mom, "I love you, I love you, I love you." He never says he loves me, but he signs it. So he knows the sign. And only I get that. So, like, he's understanding and developing his own sensibility of being, you know, the son of a deaf parent. You know, it's really interesting.
And you write so movingly about your son in Science Music.
Oh.
And there's an entire section where you talk about trying to decide what to name him.
Yes.
And one of the possible names is Orwell, as in George Orwell.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was kind of curious about the relationship between your work and politics. Because I think it's quite clear that you are interested in politics in a very specific sense.
Yes.
In the sense of the ways in which politicians or political figures shape policies that can harm the deaf community or enrich the deaf community. The ways in which, you know, our hands are sometimes tied by the state. Do you see the book as a polemic? I know you write in the book that this book is not a polemic, but... I
think it is a book. You're tricking me. You're doing my editor did, and you're tricking me. I think the thing one of the things I'm trying to balance is that kind of idea of, first and foremost, I'm a literary writer. I am deeply invested in the tradition of literature and writing, and much of that has grown from my reading and my listening. And there is a culture that tends to look down on that in a way that's kind of like, you cannot be, if you're overtly political, your literary capability is lessened. But I always, especially that I'm in a literature space now, I'm not in Parliament, you know what I mean? But I do a lot of advocacy work for deaf people around the UK. I am an advocate for several deaf charities, and that's all political work. And the book, what I've written in there, gives a useful context to my charity work. Yes.
Yeah, you really shed light on some of the destructive effects of
Yes.
certain cutbacks, for instance,
Oh, yes.
in the education system.
Yeah,
Or stuff
exactly.
like that. And even on another level, when you say, I cannot be read without the colonial gaze, I mean, that is inherently political.
Yes. But one of my frustrations with when people talk about linguistics and they talk about colonialism and they talk about all of the things that are around the colonial gaze, they often forget with me what they project onto me, and so they often forget the deaf context, because that's also important and an important part of my my language and the space I take up. And so when you think about how, like in Jamaica, you got two sign languages. In the country, you got country sign, and then in the city in Kingston, you got JSL, Jamaican Sign Language, and they're different because of infrastructure. So in the country, you got a whole language that's invented by these deaf Jamaican farmers, and you could look at the language that these deaf Jamaican farmers have created as one of the most decolonized languages in the world, because it's purely invented through gesture and with the context of self-sufficient people who are communicating and serving their community and each other. And that's interesting. I'm kind of going off a bit. I'm going to come back to, can I read Signs Music? Because I think that ties into my space as someone who thinks a lot about how to incorporate and honor these different kind of identities and gazes and developments of language.
You say, like in the book, you say, at no point in history was there a singular, universal deaf experience. And, since you've been here at Bocas, I've seen you talking to various members of the community and just kind of still conducting the investigation.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, what are some of your observations about deafness in the Caribbean versus, like, perhaps between Jamaica and Trinidad, or...
I think the right person to answer that would probably be that man there, Ben Braithwaite and Ian, because they're living in Trinidad. They've been developing and documenting sign languages from around the Caribbean. These have been my go-tos. This is my source of information. So please speak to these two here. They will give you first-hand insights and experience, which will sound much better coming from them than it will from my English mouth.
Let's talk a little bit about the title of the memoir, which to me, its richness begins there. I mean, you're a poet, so obviously titles are important. They're important for everyone, artists, writers. So it's The Quiet Air, an investigation of missing sound. And The Quiet Air is an allusion to this anthology that was published in 1988 containing a Ted Hughes poem that you've quite powerfully responded to in your writing, both in your poetry and in the memoir. So that aspect of the title looks to the past, but yet an investigation into missing sound is very much about the present. It's a reference to, I've traced it to one of your spoken word poems, The First Time I Wore Hearing Aids. How did the title come about? What were you aiming to signal to readers, particularly when you use that word, an investigation? Because normally when we think of an investigation, we think of something procedural, something very forensic, but you're using it in a very Socratic sense of the examined life and a personal inquiry. I was just wondering, how did the title come about?
Like you said, The Quiet Ear was the name of an anthology documenting how deaf people have been portrayed in literature over the past 100 years. And that's where I saw the Ted Hughes poem, which, it's long to explain, but it's a problematic poem and I erased it. And how The Quiet Ear, so here's a tip for the writers here, because I know there's lots of writers. You can't copyright a title. You can steal other people's titles and not be sued. So take that and run with it, because The Quiet Ear has a stolen title from this anthology.
You paid homage.
I'm paying homage.
You're in dialogue with the previous.
Yeah,
your literary forebears.
You see, these are the quiet, spiky ways that my Jamaicanness comes out. I'm trying to cut you. So I cut The Quiet Ear, and I'm allowed to do that.
Sorry.
Yeah, don't go.
Speaking of cutting, there's a lot that you did not put in the book.
Yeah.
For instance, I understand that you have developed a pretty idiosyncratic recipe for saltfish and ackee, and I was waiting to read in the book where this was gonna
How?
No, it's nowhere in the book. But seriously, you made very, very careful curatorial choices as you crafted this text. You excluded certain things. You, for instance, you decided you're not going to talk about Beethoven because you were like, no, forget him. Right?
Wait. You just went to ackee and saltfish. My style of ackee and saltfish to Beethoven.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I didn't. How do you know about my ackee and saltfish?
I investigated. This is an investigation into.
Listen, all right, here's the controversial thing about ackee and saltfish for me is that I put broccoli in it, okay? I mean, I'm sorry. It's the way I was raised.
So shocking.
I cut up little pieces of broccoli and I put it. My dad is not happy about it, but I like it. Maybe I am English after all.
Yeah.
Boo.
Wow.
No, I've turned them against me. I've lost the crowd. Sorry. I don't remember ever putting that out there. I have no idea where you found that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before this event, we were preparing certain extracts to read, and the idea of you reading a poem in response to any one of my questions arose. And I thought that was so instructive because it just shows, again, how organically fused all of the writing is. I was wondering if perhaps you wanted to read a poem for us, perhaps a poem that's meaningful to you or that maybe relates to your son or somehow relates to the memoir or speaks to the memoir.
Lisha, could you stand here, please? Is that okay? Okay. Okay. So this is going to be my first time seeing this poem in Trinidadian Sign Language. So I wanted to see it. This is a poem about my son teaching him to sign, the first signs that I saw him do. He has a sign name. In the deaf world, you get given different names. So my son's sign name, this is British Sign Language, is this, Ira, because he has big eyes, wide eyes. And his name, IRA, Ira, it means watchful of the earth. Watchful of the earth. So, Ira. I'm going to do this. This is the baby sign for music in British Sign Language. Let me see it in Trinity. Nice. Okay. The first word my son signed was music. Both hands, fingers conducting, music for everything, even hunger. Open mouth for the chew, spoon squealing, music. We'd play a record while he ate music when he wanted milk, so I pour and hum a lullaby, or I Don't Know by Bill Withers, because it's okay not to know what you want. And I want him to know that. Music is wiping the table after the plates. Music is feel my forehead for fever, is whatever occurs in the center of the body, whatever makes arms raise up, up. The second word my son signed was bird. Beats finger to thumb, bird for everything outside. Window, sky, tree, roof, chimney, aerial, airplane, birds. I saw I'd given him a sign name. Fingers to eyes raising from thumb, wide eye, meaning watchful of the earth in two different roots, Hebrew, Sanskrit. I love how he clings to my shoulders and turns his head to point at the soft body of a caterpillar, sliding across the counter, and signs, music.
I'm going to open up the floor for questions in a bit, but before I do, I just wanted to ask you, thank you so much for that. Can you talk a little bit about your sign name? And your journey, the ways in which it's changed, how it might reflect your own journey of self-acceptance?
I have to stand up here because I'll need to show you how to sign name. So at school, my sign name was R-Cat because I used to hide my hearing aids. I didn't want people to know. Well, I didn't want the hearing people to know. So I used to grow my hair long. Hearing aids were a lot bigger in those days as well. And I would wear hoods and hats. And so the other deaf people would, they knew that. So they're like, okay, I see you, Raymond. So that was me, right, at school. But much later, when I kind of developed a way to find language in poetry, that I was given a new sign name, which was which is sunshine, light, because hood came off, hat came off. My hair is now short on the side, so the hearing aids got a bit smaller. And so I'm kind of out in the light now. So that's like how a name can change within the deaf world is interesting.
That's really powerful. And as you mentioned, going back to your school days, could you tell us a little bit about how you write about teachers in the book? Because that's very important to you. And I think you're still a teacher, aren't you? Or is that...
Still a teacher? Yes, freelance. I worked with high school, secondary school kids for 6 years, but I come out of that and I just do freelance. I work with a lot of men in prisons as well. Different projects, depends where I am in the world, depends on the project. I guess the skill that I trade on is something called emotional literacy. People know it in the pedagogical world. That's actually what I'm trained in. I'm kind of a trained therapist for people to explore their lives creatively and how that can be used as therapy. But I do see that practice as different to my own practice, even though there are many overlaps. Yeah.
So does anyone have any questions? Oh, we have quite a few.
I just have to say I was so incredibly moved by this whole session, and I'm really pleased my name is IRA. But the thing that struck me while you were speaking was that, the PTSD, the sense of shame that, came out maybe in Jamaica. I was hearing both child, I was hearing grown up, I was hearing a kind of evisceration that came out. I was hearing off the book therapy that you did not want to bring into the book because perhaps you thought it affected the integrity of it. I just want to find out from you whether you think the whole writing of this has also explored shame, the sense of shame of being different, and by bringing it out, by humanizing it, by turning it into poetry, have you had some sense of healing? I mean, it's a very cliched word, but that's essentially the question.
The healing, I think, was demonstrated in the sign name. And I guess this is what I mean about poetry giving me company, giving me language, giving me just words, phrases to wrestle with, which were, I realize now, a kind of catharsis, actually, because it's still a displacement activity. I hyper-focus on these words, on this story, on this language, and I try and be present with that in a way because I'm struggling to be present with the thing that's underneath that. And so I now understand that for myself as a person, I think, still on a journey, but as a much more healed person than I was before, for sure. But I do think becoming a parent, becoming a dad, erupted a new set of complications. But it's life, right? We all just roll with that. Thank you for your question, and I'm glad that you got my son's name too. Even though, different pronunciation, but IRA. Yeah, beautiful.
Were there any other questions?
It's not really a question. It was just to say, even though you're Jamaican, maybe you don't realize that one of our founding fathers, Eric Williams, was
Yeah, I do know Eric
also,
Williams,
but
Yeah.
he always very visibly, because he was bald, wore a hearing aid. So we have a very marked image of one of our leaders and writers and noteworthy mentors who also had hearing issues and wore a very visible hearing aid, which is, we had a very positive image of it, in other words, I think, I hope.
Yeah, so I did look at Eric Williams, and I do know that quite iconic image of him with his device, his hearing device. The thing that I struggled to find with Eric Williams was his own contention, public contention with it. He seemed to not engage with it or refuse to. And I could be wrong. If you have anything with him actually kind of talking to that and addressing that, I would love to.
He
find that.
infamously would turn it off whenever he didn't want to hear what the
Yeah,
cabinet
I saw
had
that.
to say.
I saw that. Yes, yes, that was good. That was good. And yeah, didn't.
You kind of do that too in your...
Andre, you're airing me out, man. You tell them about my ackee and saltfish.
It's in the book. It's in the book. That was in the book. I didn't have to...
Okay, fair.
I think there was another question.
Yeah.
No, I've just come from a session on translation in the festival, and I'm curious to find out if you feel like there's a lot of inherent translation both in your experience and your work, and do you find that enriching, stressful? Question mark.
Do I find the change stressful between...
No, translation.
The conversation stressful?
No, translation.
The
Do you find translation to be inherent to your experience and work, translation, or do you find the fact that translation is part of what you're doing, do you find it stressful or interesting?
So interesting. Yeah, I do consider myself a translator. I translate some English language poetry into British Sign Language poetry. Something I'm trying to develop now is VV practice. VV standing for Visual Vernacular, which is a bit looser lyrical way of signing. In the UK, the sign language interpreters that I work with are performers. They're not just straight translations. They're actual performance, so they're able to, But yes, this is quite a good manifestation of trying to juggle the hands and the voice and it's complicated, and it's taken me a long time to own this because in the deaf world there's a lot of pushback to claiming spoken language. But I'd say in the last 5-6 years, I should clarify the reason why it's pushed back because of the 300-year oppression of deaf people to stop them from signing, and everyone. I've got 10 minutes. It's too long to go into that. But yes, and even in the Caribbean, it has its own context, which I've been learning more and more about. Too long to go into right now. But yes, I do embrace the idea of translation. I do realize that the way that even in poetry, even the way I write imagery on the page is informed by my knowledge of sign language, of BSL. And interpreters have often told me that and seen that. They understand, oh, that's an interesting way of phrasing that or framing this. That's such a deaf thing, a deaf poetic to do. So it's subtle. One of the things I saw in Trinidad, there was a poet on Thursday night who got up and gave this really endearing, powerful, affirmative poem about trans and queer people who've been losing their lives in Trinidad. And this poet had a refrain in the poem, say their name, say their name, say their name. And I was watching the interpreters at this event, and the interpreters weren't given the poem in advance. So after each name is being said, the interpreters are struggling to keep up and sign the names. So it's like, and so the names are literally getting lost in the air, in the hands, in this kind of fumbling. But I tell you, it was beautiful. I almost cried, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, only I can see this because I can read both things that are happening. No one else around me saw that. So I'm just like, Lord, that's just powerful, you know? But also it speaks to the lack of communication and the literal divide between the deaf and the hearing world. And I don't just see that in the Caribbean, I see that everywhere. I've been around Africa, I've been around to parts of Europe, I spent a week in Ukraine in deaf schools there. It's a worldwide struggle. And so what I realize is my work and my voice can be used to try and just fuse a little thing. Even having interpreters here tonight at this event, it's a shame they weren't at all the events, so just a select few. So, but I know that coming here, I've intentionally wanted that. Thank you, Ben Braithwaite, as well, for doing that. I've got 5 minutes. Should I finish?
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, I mean, it's a divide that we may only have 10 minutes, but you write so mesmerizingly about so much, such a vast history and such a vast experience in your book, and I would really urge everyone to pick up a copy. And yes, Raymond will be available to sign copies in the book signing area afterwards. And we're gonna end the session by hearing another extract from the memoir.
Okay, so this is actually inspired by a Trinidadian poet called Anthony Joseph. He's got a poem called The Ark. And I thought it prompted me to think about who are the people that I would put on my ark who've given me language that have carried me through my life and on into the future. And I would like to invite all of you into that question. Who are the people that gave you language? What are you doing with the language that you have been given? And this is truly an honor to be heard. Thank you so much for having me again at Bocas. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you to the interpreters. Thank you, Shivani. I'm also the grandson of preachers, so this will also come out. I sometimes imagine an all-hearing God, a white cloud with one tiny ear and one giant ear, neither needing help from hearing aids, neither ear missing any sound. And this all-hearing God heard enough of the world and decided to destroy the all-hearing world in a great flood. And we, mere mortals, needed passage to the deaf world, to integrate it into the world we must share, a world where what is learned from speech and sign language and lip reading and caption screens in train stations and airports and hospital wards and classrooms is all part of the air. Amazing. And my grandfather returned to earth as a voice to sermonize our salvation. Granddad JK, I'd say. We need an art to connect us to the deaf world. We need deliverance from the wrath of this all-hearing God. And Grandfather JK would ask calmly, thoughtfully, as I feel the electricity in my hearing aid meet the electricity of the question, who is on the ark? And I'd say Granville Redmond is on the ark. His canvas wet with passing storms and luminous lakes. Dorothy Miles is on the ark, signing, speaking, writing, all her gestures on deck. Johnny Ray is on the ark and all his dancing static. David Wright, with or without deaf shame, is on the ark. And so is Goya and all the animals in his black paintings. Owls, elephants, bats, dogs, bulls and large cats. And all the clean and unclean beasts are on the ark. My mother's telephone is on the ark, and so are all the teachers and interpreters of the deaf. Thomas Braidwood, Penny Wilds, Renata, Deborah, Alfred Evelyn Clark, Hashim Gazelle, Claudia Gordon, Antoinette Aiken, Tashir Widmer, forgers of good relationships, good listeners are on the ark. As you get all the names, they disappear. Grandfather, J.K., would touch his mustache, knowing whom we were about to summon. Grandmother Barbara is on the ark, hands clasped, leaning back in her floral armchair, and so is Grandmother Dorcas, literate in land, wood, and water. Donald Winnicott is on the ark, and so is the kind patience of Mr. Barry, and Mark, the swimming coach, with his gestured poolside instructions. Who else is on the ark? Thomas Gray's poems and my grandfather's handmade sound system. Every smooth and distorted syllable from Blake to Braithwaite, every school of Miss Lou, every dub of Linton, Kwesi Johnson and Jean Binta Breeze, John Agard and Adrian Mitchell, Gil Scott Heron, Musa Baruka, Michael Rosen, every talking drum blares like Beethoven on the ark. Zephaniah's megaphone, people power is on the ark. Malika's kitchen and all her silver and yellow carnival colors are on the ark. Poetry library librarians are on the ark, whispering, break a line over all the scribbling poets' shoulders. Meg Day is on the ark, and so is their phrase, deaf kin. Paddy Ladd's phrase, deaf hood. John Lee Clark's phrase, hearing canon. Aaron Williamson's phrase, deaf gain. Harriet McBride Johnson is in a wheelchair on the ark, speaking and speaking and speaking. And John Kitto and Pierre Disloge and Jack Clemo's earthy hands are on the ark. And look, my old sign name, RCAP, is on the ark, and so is my new sign name, the BSL letter R that raises over the head to open all fingers out in the BSL letter for the BSL word for light, shower, sun rays. All of it is on the ark, smelling like sweat, salt, rivers, oceans, blood, and blood. Thank you.
So much. Thank you so much. Right on time.
Thank you to Raymond Antrobus and Andre Bagoo. A special thank you to the British Council for helping Ray be here. And an extra special thank you to the Caribbean Sign Language Center, to Letitia, Sabrike, and Nicole. Thank you. As Andre mentioned, Ray will be signing books outside the old fire station. You want to get your books signed and come right back here for the one-on-one with Margaret Busby and Marina Salandi Brown.